and welcome back to Behind the Lab. My name is Tom Morrissey. I'm the Artistic Director of Theater Now New York.
And I'm Colleen Harris. I'm the Managing Director. This is our series where we introduce you to the members of our Musical Theater's Writers Lab, and we talk to them about their process and their projects. Today, we're delighted to introduce you to Paul Cozby, our Writers Lab member, along with his collaborators, Laura Bergquist and Ken Hawkins.
So let's meet Paul now and his collaborators, and they'll be talking about their new musical, Picasso in Paris.
Hi, I'm Paul Cozby, and I'm from Fort Worth, Texas. Right now, I live in New York City on the Upper West Side.
Hi, I'm Laura Bergquist, born in Phoenix, Arizona, and living in New York in Hell's Kitchen.
Hello, I'm Ken Hawkins, also born in Phoenix, Arizona, and living in Fort Worth, Texas.
Well, thank you all so much for being here with us today. We're going to talk a lot about your projects and your partnership and your process. But first, let's just get to know you a little bit better. What got you involved with musical theater in the first place?
Oh, I'll start. It was my family. There were always stories being told, starting with fairy tales and all of that kind of stuff. And there were always Broadway cast albums being played. And I believe we were taken to every production of Sound of Music within 100 miles of anywhere we were living. And also my dad was a pastor and wove storytelling into his sermon and services, and it would not be uncommon in my growing up years to have a song from Jesus Christ Superstar or Godspell sung or played during a church service. And there's something, John Caird has said this, the original adapter of Les Mis, that there's something mysterious that goes on up in the front of the church that is very much like the theater. There's smells and bells and lights and curtains and all kinds of things to look at. So it was a natural progression for me. And then into high school and college, I was playing piano and performing in musicals. And there never was a question that I wasn't going to be a musician of some sort.
For me, I grew up not really in a musical family, but my parents always took us to the musicals at the local Equity Theater, Casa Manana Theater in the Round, and I always grew up loving musicals. And as I graduated college, became a writer for journalism, PR, and that kind of thing. Also wanted to always be creative writing. And lo and behold, when my daughter was in high school, I saw her in a production of How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, which has always been my favorite musical. And I said, I'm gonna write me one of those, and ended up moving up here because this seemed to be the place to do it if you're going to do it, and had the great fortune to meet Laura our first week in New York.
And I'm a total novice. My only connection with the concept of a musical is I was reared in English schools and grew up on great literature. And so I've always been a storyteller or fascinating with great stories. And that's what we hope to bring to the stage here.
How did your partnership form?
Laura and I have been friends for years, and she has helped me with many readings and that sort of thing. But we started collaborating about 4 years ago. We wrote a Christmas musical that got a production in Wichita, Kansas, and then here. And so we enjoyed working together and kept it up. And then this year, a friend of a friend introduced me to Ken, who had this wonderful idea for the musical we're working on now, Picasso in Paris. And it was just, it was a very fortunate occurrence that I was in the lab, because we immediately brought that in as our work and have been able to move, I think, faster than we normally would have.
Speaking of Picasso in Paris, your new musical, can you tell us more about the inspiration behind it?
The story began about 10 years ago when I found a lost masterpiece. And in doing the research on that, I discovered a lot of untold information about the life of Pablo Picasso. Our story focuses on the events that happened in occupied Paris during World War II, and specifically the time period of late 1942. And the elements of the story are focusing on his courage in the face of tyranny, in the face of oppression. The Nazis were really all over him. And he was a very courageous, defiant individual. Part of that was his Spanish character, but part of it clearly was his intellect and his genius. And he was, as it turns out, somewhat of an inspiration to the resistance in Paris. And those elements of his life have been underreported in place of the art stories that all of us are familiar with. So really there was much more depth to the man, much greater character than most of us realize. And I've come to believe that he was one of the most courageous people in World War II. He wasn't in London, far away from the fight. He wasn't in Washington. He was in the heart of occupied Paris, and Hitler hated him. And so he was closely watched by this Gestapo, and yet he resisted. So he's a man of great courage, and that's the story we want to bring to light through this production.
Well, you can't get a much more fascinating foundation than that. We're going to hear a song from Picasso in Paris in just a few minutes. But before we do, I'd love to hear from you. How would you describe the style of Picasso in Paris?
Well, let me start with that from the writing perspective. And Laura's got some really keen and interesting insight on the musical side. But the musical is, I would call it a traditional musical in most ways, in that we're going to be moving the story, the character arcs forward. We're going chronologically through this time of about 1937 to 1944, taking Picasso through that. It's a little different in that we do have a Greek chorus that we have put in that are called the Muses, which are people who have inspired Picasso, because he was always, typically every time he got a new woman in his life, he started a new period of his art. But he was strongly influenced by other artists as well as influencing them. I think the biggest difference is we view that his art is like a character in the show, and we are writing it so that it can be reflected on stage, either probably through screens is how we envision it, because we want to be able to show the work of his and of other people in that time, and try to bring the time together, bring the time alive, not only through music and story, acting and dance, but also through art.
Right, and I think like with all musicals, once you start doing the history of the time period and the person, the situation that you're studying, that begins to inform what the lyrics are going to say, what the text is going to say, and definitely what the music is going to say. So I'm going back and listening to Kurt Weill and Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy and everything that was going on during that period in history all over the world, because all of those influences would have shown up in France during that time. Also, finding out in research that Picasso was a huge fan of Spanish guitars. So that has to like tuck in your brain back there too. And you know, in the orchestrations you hear flamencos and all of that. The other thing that's really interesting to me is to take a step back and look at the body of work of his art and literally ask the question, what does Cubism sound like? What do his sculptures sound like? What did he sound like early in his career when he was just starting? And when every new woman came into his life, how did that influence, and what style of music would they have brought to him? And it's been really, really fun to not try to write in a traditional way, but try to find something new. And almost every time it's, what does Cubism sound like today? And what were the influences of that time? So it doesn't, musically right now, we wouldn't say it's in the style of Rodgers and Hammerstein or Pasek and Paul or Stephen Sondheim. I wish. But we're looking for something that is as different and whimsical and new and wonderful as his art was. That's what we're trying for anyway.
Well, luckily we don't have to just imagine what it's going to sound like, because we get to actually hear one of the songs right now. We're going to hear Wake the World. And Paul, before we hear this song, could you let us know a little bit more about it and about its context within your show?
Great. Yes. The song that we've submitted is our I Want song for Picasso. It's called Wake the World. The first arc of the show is telling the story of how he came to paint what is considered his masterpiece, and that's a painting called Guernica, which is anti-war, and in particular anti-Spanish Civil War. A breathtaking piece, his first really overtly political piece, but he didn't come to paint it easily. Because he did not consider himself a political animal. He wanted his art to speak for by itself. So once he comes to this point through people not only trying to persuade him, which you can't persuade him of anything he doesn't want to do. That's just his temperament. But when he sees the pictures of the destruction, this was the fascists of Spain employing the Nazi Air Force, experimenting with a new kind of war, which was just bombing and shooting civilians, mostly women and children. 1,700 people died in a sleepy Basque town known for its culture. And when he finally saw the pictures a few days later, he began to paint one of his largest works called Guernica, which is just breathtaking. And while that painting is being painted in our show, he sings this song.
And it's sung by the wonderful Eric Van Tielen.
What I want is to wake the world. What I want is to paint so loud that one man joins with 2 men more, and they become a crowd, and that crowd begins to roar. What I want is the blind to see. There are those who will bring a night so damn dark it will crush their eyes, and the stars will lose their light, and the sun will never rise. I never wanted to be a soldier. There's fighting enough right here between the brush and the canvas. Every minute they question if you have the courage to see what's true and the courage to paint what's true. It's all I ever wanted to do. What I want is each stroke to strike like a shot from each line and hue, and this art, like a flag unfurled, leads us on to what we must do. What I must, what I need, what I want is to wake the world.
How do you envision a full production of Picasso in Paris?
Yeah, it's the way it's shaping up is it is a big musical. It's a musical that could be of a size that would be a Broadway size or a touring size musical. We want a large orchestra, but I'm guessing there's 16 to 17 people in the cast at least, plus the idea of a lot of electronics in that we're gonna find a way to put his art on stage, and that's probably on screens. We envision the screens moving. We envision that part of it being very modern, although we're telling a story that is a bit of a period piece. So we've got to reflect all that. And I like what Laura said. I mean, I think we all recognize we set a bar kind of higher than we've ever gone for before. And so that's our challenge to ourselves, is to do something that's worthy of this subject. And but a big show, a big, not always fun, but a fun, splashy, musical.
That's so exciting, and we're thrilled to be a part of it. Paul, can you tell us how you first became involved with theater now?
The Sound Bites 10-minute musical festival that Theater Now does. I believe I was in the second one with another collaborator. We did a send up of Arnold Schwarzenegger in 10 minutes. We had a great time doing it, great time participating. And I kind of began to follow Theater Now since then, and had stayed in touch with Tom over the years, and then heard about the lab. And so was just absolutely thrilled to be selected for it.
And now that you've been in the lab for a full season and developing your work there, how would you describe your experience with the Musical Writers Lab?
There's so many things I enjoyed about it. Number one, I enjoyed the required deadline to have some stuff ready to talk about. You know, there's a friendly competition that on Sunday when we meet, you want to be able to say, I've been working, I've got something working. And then of course, when you perform, you really want to have something that you share and that you're proud of. The second thing I really like is the feedback from the other participants. By design, there's a wide variance in musical styles and genres. There's a pretty decent span of age, and also experience level. And so it's just really good to get this feedback, which is invariably valuable feedback. And I just like the people in it. It's a group that's very supportive. Everyone's pleased to be in it. And I love Tom's vision for it, because he really does want it to be something that grows into kind of a lab people want to be in and will be trying to be in. And it's got a very specific purpose. And that's not just to get us to a reading, but to get us to production. And that's not a lab out there that I know. Most of them, like BMI or ASCAP, are not doing that kind of thing.
Well, it's certainly been great having you in the lab and witnessing your show as it develops. And speaking of the show, what do you hope the audience takes away when they go see Picasso in Paris? What do you hope they learn about the artist and his work?
Yeah, I can start that. Ken has been studying it for 10 years and I'm newer to it. I think the thing that has blown me away the most, or the two things, is just the sheer volume of his work, probably 70,000 pieces over 8 decades. But also there's just not a word for it other than genius. He did painting, sculptures, lithography, linotypes, drawings, collage. And every single thing he did, he took it somewhere it had never been before. And the ceramics, he just was a restless genius. And I've just been amazed by it.
One thing I found really interesting is that he was a total extrovert and was energized by people and really needed people to be in his life. And I always think of artists as visual artists as very solitary. And I know when I'm writing, I need to be alone and quiet, and I'm an introvert by nature. But he says, I can't do it alone. I have to be around people, and then the art pours out of me. And it's similar to a composer that we have right now, Elton John. He would sit down and you get a lyric and he looks at it and all of a sudden it comes out, and without mistakes or anything. And that's very much what Picasso did. He'd have these salons where everybody would come and they'd drink and eat and have great conversations and discuss politics and religion and everything else that was going on in the world. And then he would go paint and it would come out in these, glorious pieces.
Another dynamic that is equal to the man is the quality of the women that he was associated with. These women were geniuses in their own right. They were his equal. That they could stand toe-to-toe with Picasso and challenge him. And there's so many rich stories because there was so many women. But each of them have a story to tell. Each of them are very significant people. Probably chief among them is Françoise Gillot, but certainly there were many other women, Dora Maar, that had a rich impact on his life. And so we want their stories to come to light as well. It's not just Picasso, it's all of these wonderful people that were around him.
Laura, you mentioned how Picasso's creative spirit was sort of fueled by being around other people. He was an extrovert. A lot of people are feeling that right now because we aren't able to be with other people. How are you all staying creative during this time of social distancing?
Well, for me, having a deadline every 2 weeks has been marvelous. We also entered the first 15 minutes in the National Alliance of Musical Theaters kind of COVID contest they had. So it's been great to have deadlines and then to have collaborators who, we're depending on each other to do our work. And so it's been good. That part has been good for me.
Yeah, I've been doing what I never usually have time to do, and I've been taking classes, and I start a class next week in jazz piano so that I don't have to fake it anymore. I'm really going to learn to play jazz piano, and I have a new microphone, and I'm learning technology and how to make demos at home, since that's going to be our new normal, and just upping my technology game. And what I'm loving too is taking all these classes and being involved with other music directors and composers around the world. I've made new friends that we're able to encourage each other, and I've found new music directors that I'm working with on how they're playing piano for different styles, and working with other people on conducting skills, for them. So that's been really neat. I wouldn't have met people otherwise, because sometimes in these classes there's 20 and sometimes there's 150. So it's unexpected for sure, but I'm a Zoomer.
Well, it is fun to collaborate, and all of us are pushing each other, and I'm thrilled and amazed with the productivity that these two geniuses are producing. And we're all waking, our first thoughts are about this, and as we dream at night, the visions are coming to us. So as far as our being productive, we are really breaking new ground, I think.
Our thanks to Paul, Laura, and Ken for spending so much time with us and answering our questions and teaching us so much about Picasso. If you want to hear more about them, you can see our video description below, which will lead you to how to find them online.
Also, please follow us. Our handle is @TheaterNowNY. And also, please go to our website, www.tnny.org. You can sign up there for our e-list, and we'll tell you all about everything that's going on with Theater Now.
And be sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of our videos with our other lab members. See you next time.
Bye.
What I want is to wake the world. What I want is to paint so loud that one man joins with two men more, and they become a crowd, and that crowd begins to